So here we are connecting. Starting to get my winter look back on. In fact, I might even need to pull on my jacket. You know what, everyone? While I'm here, I'm just getting my other jacket on. Hey, I'm going to just prop you up for a second. I did cheer for the All Blacks in the rugby final, although I was happy for South Africa, of course. But I loved the tournament. The wind's just come up, so I am back in beautiful Vancouver. It's got a little winter in the air. I did actually play rugby growing up. I play rugby in Banff, of course. My dad lived in New Zealand for years, so I am down at world famous Granville Island, very intentionally here. I'm down here for a few reasons. One, every time I come to Vancouver, I come to Granville Island anyway, but I'm going over to my brother's house tomorrow over on Vancouver Island. I'm flying on a float plane, and so I thought I would come down here and pick up some special things. But I'm over by False Creek. There we are. So False Creek is not a creek at all, ergo a false creek. You see those dragon boats out there and the little aqua buses. By the way, so obviously you all know, or most people know, I live in Banff, in the town of Banff, in Banff National Park, but I was actually born in the city. Now, we left when I was 3, but I came back, I did my master's here. I've lived on and off in Vancouver. I'm actually an official Vancouver guide, but you know, believe it or not, among the many stupid things I've done in my life, and there's a lot of them, I owned an apartment down there about 20 years ago. And I don't own it anymore. And this is either the most expensive or second most expensive real estate environment in the world. So there you go. It's all right. Yeah, Finn's in Brisbane, but he's heading down to Melbourne in a day or so. By the way, as I always say on these Facebook Lives, I love to have people joining in. But if I miss you, it's because I only see one line flicking through. But I did want to take the opportunity to tour here, and I'll try and do one over on Vancouver Island as well. But here are the False Creek ferries. Now, downtown Vancouver is ultra modern. It's an overcast day. So what I did is I came back from Europe just the other day. So I am 8 time zones from London, 9 from Croatia, where I was. I came back for exactly one night. But as Finn was flying to Australia with his dear mummy, I just hopped on the plane with them, came out here, and I've been visiting a couple of friends here in town. Normally I come to Vancouver so much. In the last couple of years, I just haven't been through the summer, so I come out here. My brother lives over on Vancouver Island. Well, he and his wife live up island. So tomorrow, as long as the weather's good, I will take a float plane from the inner harbor here. It takes 21 minutes. And I'm going to fly over. And so I will have been to Granville Island Market and got some really lovely treats. My brother just had a really bad, rough bout of COVID. His first one, really. But he's still feeling kind of rough. So I thought, well, the best I can do is not have them cook for me, and I can bring some yummy stuff. Hold on, let's just take a moment. And I'm going to give you some of the history around here. So Granville Island is not an island, and Vancouver is not Granville, although that was actually the first name of this city. But let me first acknowledge, there's Dragon Boat Racing. This is often considered to be the fittest city in the Western world. Just seems to saying I don't look too tired. You know, I flew home from London. Now, I was able to get one restful day in London. Flew home, went for my cold plunge in the Bow River, and then I came out here and got in really late, and it was a storm. That's why a lot of branches down. And then I went to the gym yesterday morning for 2 hours and had a lovely lunch, and then went to bed at like 6:45 or something. And this morning I got up and went down to the ocean and swam. The ocean temperature right now, I had to Google it because it was actually colder than I thought. It was about 8.3 degrees where I went swimming. That's Celsius. So that's probably 45, if I were to guess, something like that. But it was lovely to do that. And these are the floating houses down here. So Granville Island is an old industrial area, and there are still cement works here, but of course has developed into the public market. That is, the number one public market in Canada for sure. For the floating houses, the really famous ones are over in beautiful Victoria. But remember, game on when it comes to architecture in Vancouver. Check out that fantastic building where I'm staying. The ocean's nothing done. When you're in central Vancouver, you're surrounded by water on all sides. Now, if you have a really good eyes, I don't know how well it comes through the screen here, but all those big modern towers out there, I'm looking over towards Yaletown, but in the distance are the snow-capped peaks of the coastal mountains. Now, why Vancouver is often rated, it was always one of the top 10 cities in the world, but one of its great advantages is even though it's dense urban living with the noises and sounds that happen, you are never more than 20 minutes away from wilderness. It's also extremely liberal, very educated city. So now Diane's going to be here with me next May. And so there's lots of ideas I have view there. But these floating houses, there is actually a hotel down here in Granville Island, but I don't really necessarily recommend. Well, it's a nice hotel, but you're just a little further away. So you pick your battles, and of course, it's the cost. There's another fabulous new building going up in the distance. But what they've done, so basically, if you need to know your way around Vancouver, the mountains are always north. And so the buildings are built in these long, straight angles, and you'd have to know the city pretty well. There's a brown building way out in the distance there. That's the Vancouver Public Library. That's way out in what is considered the entertainment district. Well, yeah, the theater district, because that's where the film festival is. Of course, about 20-25% of everything that's considered Hollywood is made here in Greater Vancouver. So whenever you watch a film, and if it says Lionsgate Productions, that's Vancouver. Another thing just to point out while we're here is there's a big silver dome way in the distance. That's the end of False Creek. That was built for Expo 87, the World Exposition. That's really what put Vancouver on the map. So they changed the game. And then all of these huge towers, of course, date from the takeover or the handover of Hong Kong over to China. And so much Hong Kong money flowed in here that it spurred this incredible development of architecture. And again, you know what? I live in a national park. I'm thrilled and I love where I live. But as an urban model, to me, this is one of the best. We live in a world now of 8 billion people. Now, I'm not that old, and I'm not going to have any debates about this, but in my lifetime, the world population has doubled. Right? So in a world of 8 billion people, we can't all have acreages. Otherwise, we'd all be stuck in cars or there'd be no green space. And so this is a model. You have a little 2-bedroom apartment. You don't even have a parking stall, but public transport here is excellent. And so you can actually get around. In fact, oh, there's one of the float planes just coming over right now. The largest fleet of float planes in the world are here. And so tomorrow I have one booked to go over to the island. Now, the only thing is they fly under the clouds and without radar. So if you have inclement weather, they can be canceled, but there's always a ferry option. I'm going to ferry back on Wednesday, and then I will be home on Thursday, out to Banff, and I'm home for a few weeks. Now, you see, this is old industrial. I do want to acknowledge, which is always important, I am on Musqueam land. There are 3 principal First Nations that live in and around Vancouver. Their languages are still spoken, albeit at risk, and they own some of the land around the city and in it, which is pretty incredible for them. But the bridge up in the distance, look at these great floating houses. I hope you're enjoying them because they are just lovely. But the bridge up in the distance is the Granville Bridge. I always tell tourists who are in the city center, the downtown, which is the other side of False Creek, I tell them, don't walk over Granville Bridge to come to Granville Island. And it's not that it's unsafe. It's that on this side, on the south side, the Granville Bridge splits into 4 and then 6 directions. It comes right over Granville Island, so you can never find your way around. So when you cross from the city center over here, you pay the $2 or $2.50, whatever it is, for the little water shuttles to go around. Of course, around the whole edge of Vancouver is the seawall, and that's 32 odd kilometers around. Longest continuous seawall of any city. The downside to the seawall is it doesn't have as much, I mean, it's very active, and the city's incredibly active, but it needs, I think, it's so many of these people because all those apartments you see are all millions of dollars. There's not enough like cafes and restaurants right on the seawall because nobody wants an obstructed view from their expensive apartment. So interesting point. But down here, by the way, there's also a university here on Granville Island. In fact, I'm not going to go through the tunnel. I'll go around the other way. And that is Emily Carr University. Now, Emily Carr was born on Vancouver Island. She grew up out there, quite a wealthy family, and she was classically educated in Britain and France. But she came home and spent the rest of her artistic career in amongst Indigenous communities, and really gave, well, birth, or the renaissance, a real rebirth of Indigenous art in what Americans would call the Pacific Northwest and what we call, British Columbia out here on the coast right up to Alaska. I mean, some of the best organic art in the world. And of course, when the settlers came here and the missionaries, they made all of that illegal. They ended the potlatch culture. Well, now, of course, we're just infused with the beautiful art everywhere that is so much part. And Emily Carr is sort of credited with bringing that back to legitimacy. And when Tom Thompson and the group of 7 who started Canadian art in the East got together and met her and said, "You're one of us," it was sort of the birth of that modern system. So we're here. Yesterday was Remembrance Day, by the way, and of course in a world, but I just wanted to say, because it was Remembrance Day yesterday, A couple of things. I put up a picture of the Canadian cemeteries in Normandy. My grandfather fought with the Canadian forces, and he did come home, and so obviously a good thing from a family point of view. But every time we go to these ceremonies, and my poppy fell off, unfortunately, but we go to them, we always say never again. Yet it all seems to happen again and again. But that's why it's a long weekend here. So outside here, it's probably 6 or 7 degrees Celsius right now. So it's not, but this is typical of winter. Grayer here, but still lovely, and you can get out and do things. So why don't there's a couple places. Hi. This is a long weekend on a Sunday. This whole place will be so full later, within an hour or two. So I thought I'd come down here and then have a nice day. I'm going to catch up with some more friends here. I just don't get back to Vancouver the way I really want to. I want to walk you up one street, so I just to head to the distance here for a second. So Greater Vancouver is about 2.8 or 2.9 million people. There is, right in the downtown center, the hardest thing is, of course, the downtown east side is where you have just terrible addictions problems and issues like that are important to acknowledge. Not quite as maybe extreme as you see on the streets of San Francisco and things, but I do know that the federal, provincial, and city governments spend $1 million a day there. But of course, in a country where in most places you would freeze to death in the winter, it's not that surprising that people would migrate out here. Always careful around here. There's some crows that are very territorial. So there is a ballet center over there. So I was going to tiptoe through it, but I think the doors are closed, so I won't just at the moment. These lovely little gardens down through here. There's also the kids market. There's one section in the Granville Island area where I'm always quite careful because I seem to lose reception there. But yeah, so the artisan district. In fact, I still have in my house at home a couple of tables that a gentleman made for me or for us about 20 something years ago. He was a Spaniard and was a friend, and then he passed about 10 years ago, but he would do ironworks down here, but really as a hobby. So thanks, Ruth. Look at this lovely woodwork. And of course, you can find driftwood all over the coast. And the artisan sake maker. Why do they do it? Well, for the sake of it. Who doesn't like nice sake? And then, of course, public art. And there's all sorts of play areas. You know what? I want to get down to the end of the arts district here. Show you a little bit more through here. I will try and walk through the market itself at the end, but I don't want to do so until the end. I really don't want to talk in there because it gets so busy that I don't want to put a camera up in people's faces. But this is one of the sites you have to come to when you come here to Vancouver. And of course, you're right along the water. I have to tell you a quick story about my super kid, Finn. He's a real fish eater, which is why with my friends from Louisiana, I have to take him down there. But he's always just loved fish and seafood. And with his own money, this is the ironworks. This is where a fellow who made a couple of tables for me used to put in some of his own artwork. Lovely thing. But I came here one time with my kid. Finn comes out to Vancouver a lot with me. And he saved up his own money, and he bought himself wild salmon fish and chips. Here's the island. Gives you a sense of where we actually are. So he bought himself wild salmon fish and chips. And he was so excited. He walked outside, and immediately a seagull dive-bombed him and whacked into the fish. And it didn't get it, but it fell on the ground. And Finn said, I refused to eat it. He thought it was dirty at that point. So I enjoyed his fish and chips, and I didn't pay him back for them. It was a life lesson learned. Now, let's just loop around down here for a minute. And I'm happy to, it's a yummy diet. It's tell you a lot more about Vancouver. Of course, back in the Hago days when I was doing a lot more virtual tours, I really separated this city up because it deserves so much. And so often I'll do trips over it at Stanley Park, of course, and that is lovely. But I thought it was kind of a flat light. And I think a friend of mine did one at Stanley Park the other day, so I thought, bring you down here. Now there is, if you can see it, the rainbow up top, that's the kids market up there. And they even have a kids entrance. And then there's Tony's Oyster Cafe in the distance. I've never understood why people open these oyster bars. I mean, oysters can't even sit on a stool. But by the way, check that out. That sign is not kidding around about cycling down here. Right? And you can pretty much bike everywhere. I think I told you. So I was in Rovinj in Croatia just the other day. I mean, literally 6 days ago or something, 5 days ago, and staying at this just spectacular hotel called the Grand Park, one of the best hotels in all of Croatia. And breakfast, they actually had an oyster bar with champagne. So I was both thrilled and a little dizzy with the rest of my day. Now, I'm going to loop around, but I just wanted to come down here and just give you a sense of where the sort of pseudo island is. Now, there is a train that runs in the summer, sort of a tourist train, along the side of False Creek. We're in the Fairview Slopes. Some of this land is leased land down here, and leased from First Nations. But look at the intense growth and always the birds. Of course, if you went south of here down to Tsawwassen, where you can take the ferries over to Vancouver Island, although you can also go from Horseshoe Bay, this is the time of year you can see dozens and dozens of eagles down there because it doesn't get as much snow and cold, and so it's just a great place for them to assemble, which is pretty cool. But this is the seawall right along here. This whole way you can walk down. So back when I did live here, I would jog up or bike up to the market. Biking was about 8 minutes from my place, and you'd buy, the market's quite expensive, as markets are, but I'd buy just enough just for one meal, and so there was no food waste either. So there's a lot to be said with this kind of traditional consumption rather than, the huge boxes from places like Costco. Now, I can't say much about that as I live out in the national park. Everyone does a Costco run once a month. But here in a city like Vancouver, so much of it's kind of boutique now, which is just lovely. And so obviously kind of fun and artsy. But let's go kind of cross and then we'll head up towards the actual public market itself. And it's just a fun place to be. Some of the things that, well, it grows so much up the lower mainland here as well, that Vancouver is one of these cities that can actually live the so-called 100-mile diet, if you've heard of it. Try and draw a ring around where you live and just consume within 100 miles. It's both ethical and healthy. Look at this lovely mural over here. This one's new. At least new, 2022, okay. Look at that lovely thing. So, huge amount of the life here. But I'll walk around back and we'll go over and see part of the marina. They even have trips that go out whale watching from here. I personally recommend that you go whale watching from Vancouver Island. I think it's a lot easier from Vancouver, unless you're really lucky and they're out in the Straits of Georgia. You really have to get out quite a long way, which means moving pretty fast in the boats. I didn't want to put the camera into the kids market because there's obviously a lot of kids in there. There are a whole bunch of kids clearly having some sort of an art day out there, which is fun for them. So there's the Vancouver Fish Company. Lots of restaurants down here. Now the market itself only stays open till 6. We're right under the big bridge right now, which is pretty fantastic. And, we don't get in Western Canada, you don't get a lot of that industrial feel really anywhere. But of course, transportation is a major issue on the coast here because you have the largest network of float planes, the largest network of ferries in the world, and inlets and rivers and all sorts of things. Look at this lovely marina. This is the marina. Of course, the 2 happiest days in a boat owner's life. The day you buy it, the day you sell it. But there's the Burrard Bridge in the distance, and then the hill up in the distance on the far side. That is actually the city of West, or the municipal district of West Vancouver up there. And up at the top of it is Cypress Bowl. If you can just make out through the trees, there's a bit of snow. It's one of the 3 ski areas that are like less than 20 minutes from Vancouver proper. There's also some nets down there for crab. And they do say kind of famously that this is the only city in the world where you can really ski and sail in the same day. There's a city I went to out of Sapporo in Japan, small fishing city, and they had a ski hill right behind it. So actually, there's 2 places in the world that I know of you can do that. For those of you just joining in, part of the reason I wanted to come down here is sometimes you have seals right down here in the harbor, but it's usually when people are coming in with salmon, and I think salmon season is done right now. Although it's nice that it's been rainy and cool. Desperately need the precipitation here, and back home is dry as can be. Now, the reason why so many leaves are down off all the trees was this massive storm the other day. In fact, flying in, it's not often it happens, and I fly a lot, as you know, but they actually came on and said, everyone, we are going to suspend all service, tighten your seatbelts, and there were winds of 70 to 90 kilometer hours. I was so worried that Finn's flight onto Australia would get cancelled, but the airport stayed open, which is good. Said it was a bumpy takeoff, but not a big problem. Lovely wood carving. Of course, wood carving has gone on out here for time immemorial, and that's because people have lived on the coast of what is now, well, Turtle Island, but North America, lived on the coast out here quantifiably now. We're sort of suspecting 40,000 years. And of course, they've always carved wood, totem culture. And so that's a huge, huge tradition in the area. And all the different kayaks out through the area. So wood carving. And of course, some of you have joined me for virtual trips out in gorgeous Hope, which is about a 2-hour drive inland. That's really where you get to the mountains inland. Now, if you went up over the Burrard Bridge, now that's not the Lionsgate Bridge, it's the other side. You then go over the Lionsgate Bridge and you get over to West Vancouver. The houses up on the side of the hill there are the British properties, oddly enough, developed by the Guinness family, Guinness from Ireland. And they built the Lionsgate Bridge, and it was truly a case that if you build it, they will come. And that is the most expensive real estate in Canada, which is among the most expensive real estate in the whole wide world. It is a little tough in Vancouver because so often the conversation falls back to housing and the cost of housing, but it is such a major issue. There is a nice little tent that says Atlantic Lobster Rolls. Now, I was just in Atlantic Canada about 4 weeks ago. Those of you who obviously follow along see how much I actually travel. I call it dry dock for the boats. And when I'm down there, I always have a lobster roll, a lobster bisque, and then it's so rich that I go home and I eat a vegetarian diet, which is part of the fun. But yeah, look at all these ships telling me proceed with caution. So I will proceed cautiously, but also confidently. How's that? Now the Tap and Barrel bridges, that's actually a chain out here. Now you can see some of these other fabulous buildings. But yeah, Diane, I love lobster too, although I don't really, here is more crab. Right? There's the boatyards. But you can actually see, if you have very good eyes, the top of the mountains in the distance, you'll see the snowy peaks up there. And you can maybe even make out the ski runs. That's where, during the 2010 Olympics, that's where they had the aerials and those sort of events. And a fellow from my hometown of Canmore, although like I said, I was born here, so if I had a hometown, he got a silver medal in the snowboard cross. You know, where they have like the race, it looks like a roller derby. Super cool thing, but he has struggled with concussion, post-concussion, ever since his years of competition. Those are tough sports. So I'll just cut down through here. So for those of you just joining in, this is Granville Island, Vancouver. I do have a toque on with my headphones, so I don't know if you're hearing the seagulls coming through around me. I mean, compared to home, of course, the dry cold, this is a damp cold for sure, and famously, you know, a rainy place. Oh, you too, that's great. But it's a rainy place, and that adds to it because it's a temperate rainforest. In fact, really part of the largest network of temperate rainforest in the whole wide world. So beautiful British Columbia, as a territory, is larger. It's about the size of France, Germany, and Britain all put together. And there's about 5.5 million people. Now, 2.8, 2.9 million, we rounded up to 3 here in Greater Vancouver, about 1 million on Vancouver Island. That means the rest of this huge territory is only 1.5 million people. So for those of you who have watched my virtual trips in Littlefield, town of Field in Yoho Park, that is still British Columbia, but it's a lot closer, about an hour from my house. So this bakery over here, highly recommended. And then they have buskers playing music, live music. It's always licensed. So why don't we just take a little stroll into the market? But I say, once I go in there, if I talk, I'll talk very lightly. And of course the market, it's funny, even though this is one of the most important tourist sites in Vancouver, they don't love tourists here in the sense that so many tourists don't buy the fresh food and everything, of course, because you can't take it with them. So when you do come here, I recommend at least come for lunch. And the way I have lunch here is I go and get a bottle of wine and I sit down by the water. Now, when I go and get little things, they do have a whole food court, but I go and get things from the different stalls, and I'll pick up particularly the smoked salmon. really important to inhale um, vigorously. Ooh, do you know what? I'm not going to try and go in this door here, just because there's far too many people in there. But I will just try and come in around. These famous Lee's donuts. I really don't eat donuts, so I can't speak to it. But people do love them. So let's come on into the market for a minute. So excuse me if you don't hear me as you come in through here, but so many of these products as well are grown here in British Columbia. The oranges wouldn't be, of course. And so many other things are grown up the valley. Now, let's do a little loop around. Because how do you not love a public market and an artisan's market as well? So, that was Beethoven's favorite fruit right there. Da-na-na-na. If you're a cheese fan, they make all sorts of organic cheeses. And they're only sold in BC, and this is a whole bagel place here. Now, these are a bunch of the British Columbia cheeses. The place where everyone's lined up here is where I will be spending about $100 after we're finished with our visit today, just so you know. There's a few things I buy there. I won't mention too much for those who don't like meat, but it's a French family from Alsace. Okay, I'm just waiting to get around here. Cut through 1 second. Those lovely fresh flowers too. You can smell. I wish you could smell it. The seafood down here is where you get a lot of course, the wild salmon from here in British Columbia. The only snack I've had is I had a roll mop when I got here. That is pickled herring wrapped around a pickle. And so I had, that was my treat for getting all the way here this morning. Now, I'm actually going to cut back. I have found that the one place I cut out is at the I'll try and go to the right, but I won't go left. And it's just the one place where signal has cut out on me from time to time. By the way, if you're vegetarian or vegan, everything caters to it here. So I forgot to bring my assistance animal with me, but I wish I did. And come back out to suddenly the views. Look at this, by the way. This is a really interesting thing. Feeding birds is so unhealthy that BC now considers it indirect animal cruelty. And yet, another busker. By the way, I always go back and give money to all these buskers as well. Less so now, but I, of course, spent nearly 2 years living off virtual tours and tips. So I think, what comes around goes around. There's a crow here telling stories. Crows every evening migrate in Vancouver as they do in other parts of the world. Look at the size of these gulls. These gulls are very well fed. So here you go. Built in 1916 atop a mud flat used by the local First Nations people as fishing grounds, Granville Island began as an industrial island. Let me just tell you a little bit more about that history of Granville. So this is the Granville Bridge once again. Right down at the very end of it, you Granville Street, you get down. It's only a 20 to 30 minute walk based on here, but not more than that, right across central Vancouver. So incredibly densely populated, but the trade-off is you can be in wilderness, as I mentioned, but you get down to Gastown. That's where the whole thing started. Really, it's a very young city for such a famous, world-famous city. But the so-called earliest mayor was Gassy Jack Dayton. He came from Hull in England. He came here and they had built a lumber yard. He wasn't part of that, but he was a whiskey trader. He came up to the lumber workers and he said, if you build me a pub, a saloon, I'll give you all the whiskey you can drink in a sitting. And so literally in a day, they put up a saloon for him. And so then he became the kind of unofficial and really official mayor of early Granville. But he has been one of these characters that we've been a lot more honest about, because it turns out that Gassy Jack Dayton was a pedophile. He took a 12-year-old Salish girl from her family and forcibly made her his wife. So the statue that was there of him is gone, but the story isn't gone. And oddly enough, even though the statue's gone, I still know the story. So it's important to remember the history of that sort of thing, because of course this country is going through a long and heavy process of reconciliation. But it's important. And of course, indigeneity here, people didn't move around. Like we know exact people are still living in places their ancestors did thousands of years ago. So pretty amazing. Now, you go up to Granville. Now, this street, Granville, the next one up is Howe. And Howe Street was one of the people who worked on Captain Vancouver's ship. So Captain Vancouver, of course, James Cook came up here, but he was on the outside of Vancouver Island. He sailed all the way north into Cook Inlet, oddly enough. And then he went to the Hawaiian Islands and was killed, but not before his crew were able to bring, what do they bring? Gonorrhea back to Europe. But then Captain Vancouver, who's buried in Norfolk, Kingsland, I think, came here and sort of mapped out the inside. And there's another Vancouver, incidentally, which is Vancouver, Washington, and that used to be the headquarters of the Hudson's Bay Company. And then when the boundary was set at the 49th parallel, that was moved up to Victoria. So Victoria predates Vancouver by about 40 years. Someone had a really bad day rollerblading, I think. See one rollerblade in there, what a shame. But generally, False Creek's the only bit of coastal waters around here that's considered polluted further up the creek. But these are inlets. And then if you look at a broader map, you'll see that you've got the big round city center, the downtown center is the peninsula of Vancouver, with the 1,000-acre Stanley Park out in the distance. And I do owe you another tour of Stanley Park, but like I say, I knew I was coming here to Granville Island all the same. So I wanted to share this. By the way, if you're really into stocks and bonds, just inside here, by the arrow, it's eating, so I'm not going to go with the camera, is the stock market. But that's where you make soup. That seems pretty cool. Now, the aqua buses are these are False Creek ferries. Either or are the way to cross over. Say you got to lie and say you're a senior citizen to get some discount. But they zip up and down, which is really fun. And you can head into the city center. So much to do. But I do love coming down, at the end of the day when the lights are out. You will notice on our YouTube channel, I have a really, really excellent person helping me out now and doing some video editing and trying to dress this stuff up. We're definitely sticking with Facebook, though, just because it comes through a lot better. I'd rather do it straight on YouTube and I'd be right there. But hey, that's all the process. I tell you what, I'm going to go and try and walk around the top. Neil Young song, isn't it? Isn't that lovely to listen to? So Sunday afternoon in Vancouver. It's not quite afternoon here. But what I'll do is I'm going to try and walk a good 20,000 steps a day and build up as much hunger as possible because there's so much to eat around here. And I already know some of the food I can take to my brothers. But there you can see a point of land in the distance. So if you come here for a cruise, an Alaska cruise, you don't sail out under this bridge. It's Burrard Inlet on the other side. You sail out under the Lionsgate Bridge, out around the corner. With very good eyes, you'll see some old towers up there. They were the first real towers anywhere in Western Canada. It's a totally different vibe. One of the few places where people actually were born and raised in an urban environment. But just beyond it, the trees in the distance, that is beautiful Stanley Park. And whilst the land was taken from the Indigenous people, and it was, Rose Yelton, we have a totem to her now, was like the last person living in a village that had been there 3,000 years. So we have to be honest about that. To set aside a 1,000-acre park shows a lot of foresight. Now, there's a boat coming towards us in the distance. This boat that's coming in, maybe it's a port boat, but that's what some of the whale watching looks like from out here. And this is why you get really bundled up because they really move quickly and it gets extremely cold. Now, there's the False Creek Ferry. That's probably the one I'll take over. So I'm going to cross over and go into downtown. I actually walked over the big bridge to get here. The Burrard Bridge up there is Art Deco. There's 3 Art Deco buildings in town. Well, the bridge, City Hall, and then the Marine Building, which is a fabulous building, shows up in films all the time. And that was actually bought. It was built in 1930. It was the tallest building in the British Empire for a couple of weeks or something, and then went bankrupt, and the Guinnesses bought it out. So, pretty amazing. Yeah, I'm just watching this orange boat, whether that's Coast Guard or whether it's a whale watching boat coming in. It's funny. I've been guiding here for so many years, and I've changed my tours over the years because, of course, the city's changed so much. Tons of green spaces around Vancouver, but it takes a while. Now, you've seen these tours, those who followed my virtual tours, you've seen city center Vancouver when it's been fabulous blue sky weather, and that's Douglas Copeland, the guy who wrote Generation X. I don't know, that's Canadian Coast Guard, those guys. But he coined the city the Crystal City, and of course it glistens in the light. When it is gray like this, it can feel quite gray and flat. But then yesterday the sun came out. Now there's so much to unpack here, and every now and then I'll meet people that say, "Oh, I went to Vancouver and we can fall in love with it." And and it, you could have, it's a rainy city. You could have had 3 days of rain. But there's so much to fall in love with here. And of course, say like this morning there, I was jumping into the ocean. They do a polar bear swim here every January 1st. And some years they get to do it in the snow, which is fun. But of course, the ocean doesn't freeze here. And way in the distance, I don't know if it'll come through on the screen, but under the bridge, you might see the snowy peaks way in the distance. And that's over on the Sunshine Coast. It's still the mainland, but you can't get there except by ferry. You turn north up around the corner up there, and you head up to lovely Squamish, one of the great meccas for climbing. And then you go up to Whistler, of course, the huge resort. By the way, if you're into climbing, which obviously is a big part of my last whole life, I do recommend a movie called The Alpinist. And there's a lot of people in that movie I know. So, a bit of a heavy finish, just a heads up. But there's Granville Island Public Market sign. So I tell you what, let's just go up around the corner, and then I will say farewell to everyone. And of course, I'm here now. And in between that time, I was on the Adriatic in Croatia, where I had beautiful weather, and then I was in the UK, and I didn't do a live in London. I was still working and visiting with friends and everything. So I'm going to be home. Flying over to my brother's tomorrow. A couple of good days there. I'm going to come back here. I'm flying home from Vancouver. I spend the night with my mommy. And then I get my winter tires on the car and the winter tires on my bike. And then I will be home. So I will put on some fun tours. And do stay tuned, because I'm going to try the Facebook Live, but I can try and take you all skiing at Lake Louise. The hill's open. Got a great big snowfall the other day, so it's all in good form. Let me turn around so you can see the Burrard Bridge there and the mountains in the distance and the glory of Vancouver. So feel free to share these videos, by the way. Feel free to share them. Also, of course, we're living in complicated times around the world a little bit. I think of all my friends, a couple of friends struggling with some health issues at the moment. I'm thinking of them, of course, every day. And I'm so glad to connect with everyone. So thank you for joining me today. And I will send love down to my kid. I do want to say peace and love